Alright everybody, welcome back. This is another video where we are going to be going into super basic tutorials for Twilight Imperium and its expansion. The expansion is not going to matter so much today. This is pretty basic. I'm going to go into units, Tech 1 and Tech 2. I'll just go through them, why you'd want them, what is their significance, a little bit of strategy, a little bit what all stuff means, and their abilities, and then some Tech 2. Tech 2 in the games I've played is rare enough. You have one or two that actually see the battle by the end of the game. So I'll give you, some will be theory, some will be limited practice or tentative. I'm just going to be honest, right? It's very rare all these cards end up here. And even if they did, you waste all your money on tech, you might not have an army, you're not fighting anyway. But let's jump on in. You'll remember this board from a couple battles ago. I'm using Barony again, just because I have all the tech set out. So okay, we're just going to go bottom right to top left. And before we already talked about faction abilities a little bit. The flagships are all unique for every faction, so I'll mention theirs to show how it gives them spice. And the cost is generally uniform. Again, there's one exception. But we're not going to worry so much about flagships today. Just basic units and why you'd want them. What role do they play? Because I was talking to some people and I realized build order, no thank you actions. Build order could be really confusing. No, I don't want this. What did I do? I made a mark. No. Can I undo it without crashing? Yes. Great. Oh no, maybe I crashed it. Oh, Tabletop Simulator. I crashed it a little bit. That's fine. Alright. And this actually has some simulation calculators, so I can show you some of the math as I explain it. Alright, so let's start most basic. You can't get any ships unless you have production. Watch my other videos for what production does. So that means you need a space dock. Now, what do space docks do? Well, first off, all unit cards. They generally show you, I should show you this, the cost, the combat, the move, and if relevant, capacity. Underneath it will be any special rules. Generally. Now, the two that are exceptions, obviously, would be the two structures. These are structures, you do not build them. This is why they have no cost. But we'll work our way to the gun. All right, so space dock, what does it do? First, it lets you produce, which means you can get plastic on the board. This unit's production value is equal to 2 more than the resource values of the planet. You have to build them on planets, and they only ever die when the planet gets taken by ground assault. Now, what does that mean? It just means production means the number of pieces of plastic you're allowed to build. So, say it's on their home system, which is a 4. Let me find this. Yeah, it's a 4-0. That means they can build 6 pieces of plastic. By the way, a pretty good home system. And generally speaking, all space docks hold some fighters. So up to 3 fighters of the system do not count against your fighter's capacity. You can leave fighters, which we'll get to in a minute, in space docks to kind of just be blockers. Basically, you can't move through other people's ships. That's why it's significant. So you always need 1 space dock, or you're very much suffering in this game. I have seen people win with 1 or 2. You don't necessarily need 3, which is your max. Like say your ships weren't dying, or you had another way to build, or you're building a lot on your home system. But you got to have 1. That's the basics. Pretty simple, but yeah, you need them to build for most factions. When you would build them and why, generally speaking, there's 2 big reasons you would do it. First, if you're like Barony, and you have 2 home systems, a second space dock on your second planet, every time you produce here once, you can use the production from that to build more plastic. So that would be 4, 5, 6, and if there's a space dock here, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 pieces of plastic is a lot more plastic than 6. The second use is somewhere between your home and the middle of the map, on one of the planets you conquer, building a resupply point where you can build ships. And generally, high production is nice. Not required, but nice. Like, so for example, this one has no production, which makes it kind of crappy. And these ones are a little bit too far back. I would say if you could get Lodor here with a 3, that'd probably be pretty good. Or if you jumped over and installed Semlor. But again, each one of those is somebody else's driving point to the middle, which will probably piss them off. So just be ready to get in a fight. But you're the battleship faction, and you should fight. Nothing wrong with that. All right, basics of space docks. And by the way, like the tech, this is the 2 prerequisites you'd need to upgrade to Space Dock 2. So you need 2 yellow techs. So that's what all of these little pips mean. And that will determine, or you should at least think about it when you're doing technology, what tech will get you tech that's good for your faction. Something to keep in mind. All right, Infantry 1. Infantry and fighters have something in common. They're cost 1 for 2 units. Now, the problem, of course, is they still take production. So one cost 2 infantry still takes 2 production. So it's generally speaking harder to amass infantry and fighters. Why do you want them? Well, in the base game, infantry are the only way to take planets. There's mechs now. So, but still, price-wise, it's 2 on a 6, 1 on an 8, but you get 4 of these for the price of 1 of these. Infantry is still pretty good. Space, taking planets is really important because you get the resources. And infantry defend them, which is really important. Ground combat also favors the defender heavily. Why? Basically, everybody's stuff sucks about the same, and ties. So say I have 1 infantry left and you have 1 infantry left, and we blow each other up. Defender wins ties. Where in space, that is not the case. Like, it's not as significant because losing a planet makes a difference. So infantry are very powerful. You should always have some of them with all your fleets to take planets. There's cases where you may not do it, but almost always, I'd say, have infantry. So why? You can take planets after a space battle. Why wouldn't you want to do that? Or at least fight for them. Or there's the threat. And they're hard to amass because of that production limit. So you kind of want to start making them all game. Build a couple, build a couple, build a couple, build a couple. And suddenly you can have like impermeable fortresses on the ground. Which my last game, my Navy got wiped out at least twice. But I had almost unbeatable ground forces. It makes a difference. All right, fighters, like we talked about. They're cheap, and you get combat dice. That's nice. They have no move. Base fighters need capacity. By the way, infantry also need capacity. They don't fly by themselves. So, for example, you need a carrier. Say you had 2 fighters, 2 infantry. You can't move them to another planet without a carrier. Or a Dreadnought in the base game. Or a Flagship. There's more ways to move them, but we'll get into it. So fighters are great because they can take hits before your expensive ships, right? On a pure resource cost, they're half a resource point. So think about it. If you could lose a destroyer, the other cheapest ship, or a fighter, you always kill a fighter. There's no way you would never not kill a fighter. Or think about like a carrier or a fighter. Always kill the fighter, never kill the carrier. Fighters are hit points. That is very valuable. Their upgrade, by the way, is a green and a blue. We'll talk about why this matters in a tech. You'll see it as you play. Don't worry. So these are the base units. They're good because they're cheap, good on the ground, hit points in the air. That's why fighters are good. But they're also more dice. Now, they only hit on 9s and 10s. Because how the combat works, by the way, you have to roll their combat or better. So they only have a 20% chance to hit, but you can have a boatload of them, right? Like 2 carriers could have 8 fighters. That's a lot of freaking dice. So eventually you're going to get lucky. So I like fighters. They're fun. I think they're underused in some of our games, but hit points are hit points. They're nice. Carriers, probably the most important ship in the game because you can't take planets without a lot of guys. So they move your infantry, they move your fighters. Very nice. They're a little expensive, but I think they're the key unit in the game. There's an argument to be made. You could probably beat the game, do well with just this bottom line. Right? Carriers with a bunch of fighters and infantry. That's not a bad fleet, right? Like, especially if you upgraded them. But yeah, carriers, they're slow. They only move 1. That's the standard move, by the way. And if you see this little triangle on the bottom, this tells you what upgrades when you upgrade the card. So eventually carriers get moved 2 and more capacity. Pretty nice. Everybody wants carriers. If you're never sure to buy carriers with some guys or carriers with some fighters. Like if you had 4 money, a carrier and 2 fighters or a carrier and 2 infantry, it's always a good choice. Why? The carrier and 2 fighters is hit points in your armies. A carrier and 2 infantry is taking planets. Who doesn't want to take planets? So carriers are great. I'll get a little more into them when we talk about the upgrades. But yeah, they move your dudes. And suck at combat, of course. They're 9s. They throw a dice, not very well. PDS, this is a planetary defense system. Most basically, they do 2 things. They sit on a planet, they cannot move, and like your space dock, you have 3 of them. Now, they look free. To remind you, they're not free. In fact, they are in the construction card. I'll show you really quick. the construction card primary lets you build one PDS or space dock and one PDS. And the secondary, you can build a PDS or a space dock. So if you play the construction card, they're technically free. But remember, if you have the construction card, it means you don't have another card. And if you're spending a strategy token for it, it costs around 3 influence to get a strategy. So they're not free. They're roughly 3 influence. That's what I would say. So, but what do? Planetary Shield, Space Cannon. Let's start with the more complicated one that matters. Planetary Shield means everything on the planet cannot be bombarded, which basically means nuked from orbit. So if you have a planetary shield somewhere and somebody wants to invade your planet, normally their Dreadnoughts and their Warsongs and their cap ships can just shell your poor bastards on the ground. PDS blocks it, which it's really nice. And then there's a second ability, Space Cannon. What is Space Cannon? Space Cannon does 2 things. First, if anybody activates the system you're in, free shot before the battle starts on a 6. And if you look here at the combats, 6 is a pretty high value. Not the highest, but maybe second highest. So on a 6, anybody who activates your system, you shoot at them. And then when that same person invades your planet, you get a shot as they come down through the orbit. So it's very defensive, but you can kind of see how that'd be used. How they're used. You have a planet where you want to amass a lot of ground troops, right? And where you might not have a fleet, but you want to be able to at least shoot at the guy when he comes. Because think about it. What if you only came with 1 carrier, 2 infantry, 2 fighters? Or let's say you were really ballsy, 1 carrier, 4 infantry, and you attack a place with a PDS, and the guy rolls a 6. Your carrier's dead, all the infantry die in orbit. So it can kind of, the PDS-1 can protect your planet and keep casual threats away. Because a lot of threats will be like 1 ship moving fast, try to take your back territory. We'll talk about PDS-2. It gets a little more interesting with that. All right, that's the second structure. Next, destroyers. Destroyers' specialty, they're a cheap non-fighter ship. Some abilities basically let your enemy skip your fighters and hit your cap ships only. So if you have destroyers, which are cheap, they can take a hit instead of your Dreadnought or your carrier or cruiser. Generally a good deal. Combat is bad, 20%, 9. But early game, move 2. That means they're fast. That's nice. In addition, anti-fighter barrage, 2 on a 9. What does that mean? It means that right before combat starts, kind of like the space cannon, if your opponent has fighters, destroyers just get free shots. Every destroyer gets 2 free shots, and you get a chance to just wipe fighters off the map. Not bad. But generally speaking, these are very underused. I don't think they're bad for dice and hit points and anti-fighter, and being like kind of hit points for your fleet. They're pretty good for that, actually. And I think they're all right on an upgrade. In the old game, 2 reds was horrible. You'd never get 2 red techs if you could help it. Nowadays, red's actually decent, so you might find yourself getting destroyers more often. And if you're playing a guy who is only using carrier fleets with fighters, buy destroyers, right? He has a pretty decent, 20% chances to blow up a fighter before the battle starts. It's a good deal. But yeah, they're fast, extra hit points. The early game, they're mostly used for like diplomacy or escorting your carriers, being hit points mostly. So that makes sense. Okay, not that exciting, but they have their role. And some factions have special ones. Like last game, I was playing the Yin, and the Yin's destroyers are kamikazes. At the end of every round of combat, 1 can just die. I can kill it, and any one of your ships, I can assign a hit. So I just ram you. Those destroyers are awesome. So faction abilities can change ships that look a little bit bland and make them fun. So I had a lot of destroyers last game. That's what I mean. Sometimes you do build a lot. Now, Dreadnoughts. These are pretty much MVPs. Everybody likes a Dreadnought. Why? They're expensive. They're 4. So you could have 4 destroyers or 8 fighters, although capacity's hard. More like you could have a carrier and 2 fighters, if we're going to be honest with you. So it's 4 cost, a little pricey. Still only 1 dice in combat. Keep that in mind, right? It's a 50-50 to hit. Very good odds. And how space combat goes, it goes until you retreat or die. So a 50% over and over and over again is pretty good. It has 1 move. It's slow. As we see, it can get upgraded. Now, early game, this is important. It has 1 capacity. Dreadnoughts can carry a fighter or an infantry, which makes Conquest nice. So they can conquer a whole system by themselves. And they have 2 abilities additionally that gives them a lot of utility early game. Sustained damage. What is sustained damage? I'll just show you visibly. So you have Dreadnought here. When you shoot me in a round of combat, instead of killing my... and I can assign a hit to the ship, flip it over. It's taken a hit, but it's not dead. And at the end of the whole game round, he comes back. That's pretty good. So it's a 2 hit point ship. Nice. And he heals at the end of every game round. Not bad at all. Now, there are some cards that can make it worse, but generally speaking, it's nice to have that extra hit point. So that's why he's worth so much, and he's good in combat and carries a guy. And again, we'll talk about the upgrade. Generally speaking, blue and yellow, those are techs people like. So a lot of Dreadnoughts you see flying around. And making a move too, they're really annoying when they're fast. I should show the pieces, just for demonstrations purposes. Because it's so easy to do. I know. They look so nice. We got a Dread. Poor Warsongs never get to do anything. Little infantry chits, little fighters. I was having fun. It's good to get familiar with what the stuff looks like. Now, cruisers. Oof. Cruisers were my first love in this game. Why? Cost 2. Not that cheap, right? It's 2 destroyers. 7 combat. That's an extra 20% chance to hit every round of combat. Pretty good. 2 move. They're fast early game. Decent hitters. Would make and that so they're a pretty solid unit level 1. They're fast. They shoot between a Dreadnought and a destroyer. And they're just a fast ship. It's nice to have. They're very often used as like fleet complements early game. Before we get into any kind of faction ability, right? Like a couple Dreadnoughts and a couple cruisers as like a combined fleet. That'd be a pretty elite fleet early game. Or even like a carrier, a Dreadnought, 2 cruisers. So you have a couple fighters for hit points. Cruisers are nice. And they're nice too because they can respond. With that move 2, they suddenly can get some fun work done. But yeah, a base game, they're pretty boring. Now, they're not boring, but they're simple. They're just faster, shoot a little better, but they don't have sustained damage or bombardment. Oh, I skipped bombardment. How did I skip that? I already mentioned it, so skipping it was easy. Dreadnoughts, as I mentioned earlier in the game, get to shoot the ground. Whenever you attack a planet, whatever their bombardment number is, you get to shell the infantry for free. So 5 means a 50-50 chance you just kill an infantry. That is quite good. It's underused in the game for sure. So, again, if you're comparing these 2 ships, that's why it popped into my mind. The Dreadnought does have a lot of fun abilities. Now, like, if you ask, could 2 cruisers kill a Dreadnought? Right, because 4 cost, 2 cost. Yeah, right, but they're each 2 hit points, right, because 2 of these would be 2 hit points. They'd have 2 dice on a 7, 1 on a 5. Statistically speaking, probably the cruisers will get 2 hits in, but maybe not, right? He gets 2 hit points. Oof. And capacity. What if he had a fighter? It's a different fight, right? But fleet capacity is always your limiter. So because of fleet capacity, Dreadnoughts are always fun because you get so much bang for very little fleet capacity. So these are the base ships in the game. Now, as we said, there are flagships. Every other one does something different. For example, for Letnev, Barony, they lose planetary shield. Oops. And this ship heals every space combat round. Remember when we talked about sustained damage, you flip over? The Arch Secundus flips over, gets hit, heals, gets hit, heals, get hit, heals. He also has combat, 2 little explosions. That means 2 on a 5. He shoots twice. Now, he is 8 cost. He's double a Dreadnought. Is he worth it? Well, he does the same combat. He's slow as they are. 1 extra capacity. He makes planetary shields, aka PDS, useless. He heals a whole bunch. And he has bombardment 3 on a 5. That means when he shoots the planet, he shoots 3 times. So he's like 2.5 Dreadnoughts with a special ability for the price of 2 Dreadnoughts. And remember, 1 fleet capacity. Pretty good. You only ever get 1 in the game. So, and we'll talk about the downside of this compared to a Dreadnought in a minute. So these are the basics. There's 1 extra, of course. Everybody has a mech. Now these are almost like a faction ability, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but all mechs are 2 on 6s and have sustained damage. Remember that flipping over thing? So they're 2 hit points. So they're like ground battleships. What's special about, and everyone has a different special ability. These are, for 2 resources, you can play these, you can replace an infantry with a mech at the start of a combat. Anywhere. So if there's a very important combat happening and you had 2 infantry, but you had 2 money, right, 2 resources, you could upgrade one of those infantry to a mech. It's a big deal. And if you watch my tech video and you have non-Euclidean shielding, their faction tech, suddenly it's a 3-point mech. That's really good. All right. So you're like, Jeff, you skipped Warsongs. Yes, because it only, for most faction, works once you buy the tech, which is over here. So we'll do Warsongs next. They almost never show up in games. Why? Well, look, they're 12. They're tech that doesn't exist until you research it, and it's 4 prereq. Oy. 12 cost. Now, why would you want them? Well, they ignore Planetary Shield, and every faction's Warsong does this. They have a 3 dice on 3s. That's the best shooting in the game. They move 2. That's fast. And they have capacity 6. And bombardment 3 on 3. They're very good. Also trophy to kill. And 12 is expensive, right? That's 4 Dreadnoughts. I might rather have 4 Dreadnoughts, or really my cap ship and a Dreadnought versus this. Although his odds are still really good. Because you still have to think about it. You still have to pay all that money for that tech. But there is a faction who gets Warsongs to start. And there's a universities, the research faction. Those are the 2 who get this the most easily. And they are fun. They are barrel of monkeys. I love Warsongs. All right, so now that we're talking about tech shift upgrade in, let's get started. Tech 2. How far are we? 20 minutes. I'll blow through real quick, just the differences. So Space Dock 2, what does it do? The production value goes up to 4. That's the biggest. It adds 2 to your production value. Probably not worth it for almost any faction. There's maybe 1 or 2. I've never seen it be used well. That's it. I don't have anything to add. Unless you're doing it for an objective, I probably wouldn't. Infantry 2, totally worth it. What does it do? Your infantry got better. They fight on a 7 instead of a 8. And when they die on a 6 or greater, so 50-50, you place the unit on the card. At the start of your next turn, you place them in your home system. That means when your infantry die, they have a half chance to come back for free. Great. And as we already talked about, infantry are linchpins in this game. Unsung heroes. So, infantry 2, pretty good. Fighter 2. Fighter 2 is great. You get the extra combat boost. Now you get 2 really cool things. First, move 2. Fighters suddenly have the ability to move on their own. How does it work? Well, it explains it. This unit may move without being transported. Fighters in excess of your ship's capacity count against your fleet pool. So they count as capacity or fleet, either way. But suddenly now your fighters, which got a little bit better, also now are independent ships and can move to combats. That's nice. And look at 2 move, right? 2 move is from your home system, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, right? You got this bubble now where your fighters can move whenever you need them to. Or say you had a manufacturing base here, 1, 2, 1, 2, right? You have this giant bubble you can now threat. It's pretty good. Carrier 2, I do in fact like Carrier 2. It's a very common tech you see in the game. What do you get? Same cost, same bad combat. Move 2. Almost always, you upgrade for that move 2. So carriers suddenly have a bigger threat range. And their capacity goes up too. Again, it's nice. Both these are good. But in my opinion, you upgrade for the move, and it's pretty much always worth it. Carrier 2 is a great tech. If you're using a lot of capacity, or you have 2 blues, think about getting Carrier 2. All right, PDS 2. This one's a tricky one. Although we have 1 player being extra in our coming up game, and if you're that extra player, you probably want this. So what does it do? Well, it makes your space cannon hit 1 better. Not bad on 5s, but more important, it's now called a deep space cannon. You may use this unit's space cannon against ships that are in adjacent systems to this unit's system. For example, if I have guns here, and think you have 2 guns. If I have guns here, and people activate any of these systems, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? If anybody activates these 6 systems, my guns can now reach out and touch them. Hello, hi, how are you? Yes. So you shoot the person who activated. Very good. So suddenly now your gun that only protected 1 planet is now an offensive weapon. So like, say you had guns here and guns here, suddenly anybody who moves in any of your home systems is just getting pewed. It's really annoying. By the way, for bonus points, they shoot through wormholes. So if you built it like here, it shoots the other alpha. It's so annoying. It's great. Oh, the ghosts can really make fun with that. All right, so PDS, fun. Good, I've seen it a lot. The biggest problem will be a non-aggressive placement. But if you're aggressive with it, I think it's pretty good. All right, Destroyer 2. Why would you ever want this? You didn't get faster. You just got combat. Your combat got 1 better. And your anti-fighter went from 2 on a 9 to 3 on a 6. I would say this is probably useful if you know you have to fight a lot of fighters, because your barrage got like double, like you got 30% on your efficiency and you shoot 3 times instead of 2. That's a big deal. And now it's slightly more useful in normal combat. You don't see this one very much unless like there's an objective to have 2 unit techs. You only have 1 and you have 2 reds. But it could be situationally good. Say there's a Nalu player or something. All right, Dreadnought 2. This one I've been waiting for, baby. This is a great one. First, your combat, if you notice, did not get better. You just got faster. Now, importantly, this little text here pops up. This unit cannot be destroyed by direct hit. Now, what is direct hit? Let us find direct hit, and I will show you. Okay. This is why you'd upgrade. It's a good reason to. As an action card, by the way. Direct hit. After another player uses a player's ship sustained damage to cancel a hit produced by your units, destroy this ship. So that wonderful sustained damage ability that I just explained to you, this counteracts it. Really lame. But Dreadnought 2 just says you can't use that card anymore. So now your Dreadnoughts became a lot more reliable. 1 card can't just take them out. I think there's 6 or 7 of these. Really annoying. So you do it for the movement, and you do it so direct hit doesn't kill you. If you had a lot of chaff in your fleet or something, you might not need it. But let's be honest, move 2 is great. All right, now the last one, and it might be my MVP, Cruiser 2. What does Cruiser 2 get? You say, Jeff, there's no abilities. You are right, sir. But your combat got 1 better, right? You're on 6s instead of 7s. Now what's even cooler? Move 3. You're the fastest thing in the game. Oh my god. And what just puts a pin in it and makes me so happy. Capacity 1. My goodness. So suddenly now, you move super fast. And you can poop infantry anywhere in the game. Or if you have a big fleet and you need more fighters, it can take fighters. I have found the most utility in, like, because think about what, say you're here, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Like, you can reach his home system from your home system. 2, 3. What the heck is that? It's great. It's so fun. The best ninja strikers in the game. If you're the kind of player who wants to get into people's back systems, Cruiser 2 is great. And there's a blue tech, gravity drive. Apply +1 to the move of your ships during this activation. So single cruisers can now move 4 with a guy. Oh, it's so annoying. So they're great little ships. I love them. Yeah, that's the basics of the units, everybody. It was a little longer than I expected. Nah, it's not. It's about, this seems to be the length of videos. Hopefully this helps. And as I said, like, disclaimer, I'm not I've only played like maybe a dozen games of this ever. And I've read a lot about it, and I enjoy the meta and, like, you know, thinking about it. I like that in games. But the Tech 2s, which ones I've seen commonly, I'll be honest with you. I've seen carriers, dreadnoughts, cruisers. And PDS, actually. I would say all of these are pretty common except for destroyers and fighters. And space docks, now that I think about it. Most games, you'll see Dreadnought and Carrier and Infantry. Many games, you'll see Cruiser 2 and PDS 2. In our game group, we had a couple really bad games where, like, people spent a bunch of money on PDS and time, and they didn't do anything. So I think we've been burned by them, kind of. But I think they are good, just, you know, our meta didn't come up as much. But generally, I've seen most of them, and the 2 I haven't seen that much. I can see the theory of why they're good. It's not like a secret on the card or anything. So hopefully that was helpful to everybody. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Right short of 30 minutes. Thanks for watching.